There's a number of albums that people consider to be more of an experience rather than a body of music. Albums such as Blonde by Frank Ocean, Ego by Tyler the Creator, or even For Your Eyes Only by J. Cole fit this criteria. I asked a few people what makes an album an experience, and the most common answer was that it's a back-to-front piece of art which can only be understood and enjoyed the most when going through it all at once. Now this doesn't mean you can't listen to the songs off of the album individually, but by listening to the songs in the correct order, you can make your own story by reading through the lines and experiencing it in your own personal way, and that's what makes an album feel more like an experience. And I don't think there's a better example of this than By the Time I Get to Phoenix by Injury Reserve. For those unfamiliar, Injury Reserve is a group consisting of 3 members: Parker Corey, Richie with a T, and Jordan Alexander Groggs. After a successful debut project, they immediately got to work to try and follow up with some momentum and release another album. Unfortunately, during the creation of the album, key member Jordan passed away, and this caused the remaining members of the group to take a small hiatus midway through the creation of their next project that we now know as By the Time I Get to Phoenix. And this raises a lot of questions, the primary one being, what happens now? By the Time I Get to Phoenix is probably one of the weirdest albums I've ever heard. I heard it when it first came out, didn't really know what to expect, and absolutely hated it. It all just sounded like a lot of noise, which is probably the least objective way to put it. But at the time, I didn't know the context behind the creation of the album. So, this January, I decided to revisit the album with a different mindset and with different expectations. And then it all just suddenly clicked. By the Time I Get to Phoenix is such a weird album because it's almost like it captures an emotion strictly through sound and rather than its lyrics, which is why it's so difficult to listen to, at least for me on my first listen. And I'm not trying to gatekeep the album from anybody, but I do think the person listening has to go into the album with a specific state of mind and expectation. And it's one of the few albums that I believe you actually do have to listen to in its entirety. If I was going to recommend the album to somebody, I wouldn't just send them like a specific song and say, hey, you might like this, because I don't think this is how this album works. And this is why that I'm making this video, because I want to try and express in my words, which admittedly are sometimes incomprehensible, why this album is just so great, and why you should listen to it from start to finish. The first few tracks of the album tell the listener exactly everything they need to know, with the intro setting up the tension and the urgency for the rest of the album, and giving us an idea on what themes the album is going to be tackling, as well as the production we're going to be hearing. One of the lead singles for the project was called Superman That, which features a chaotic and noisy instrumental with heavily processed vocals from Richie with a T. And this song also features one of the final performances from Groggs. From what I understand, this track isn't meant to be taken too seriously. However, the album quickly has a complete shift in sound. The middle portion of this album feels almost sinister, dark. I don't quite know what words to use to explain it. It's almost like every song feels completely unfocused, and whatever energy we had at the beginning of the album has suddenly just disappeared. And this comes as such a drastic change of tone not only from this album, but from all of their previous work as well. Now some fans speculate that this is a reference to the passing of Groggs, how such a sudden shift happened and was almost unexpected. However, this theory has kind of been disproven given the fact that the album, from what we understand, was mostly finished by the time of his passing, and whether modifications were made or not after his death is up for debate. Injury Reserve themselves have never actually confirmed it nor denied it, but this, in theory, leaves the door wide open for listener interpretation. You see, you can kind of take two different perspectives with this album. On one hand, you can kind of consider the whole album a big tribute to Groggs. Like this project was made as a physical embodiment of the pain that they are feeling. The music videos for this album also play with the concept of silhouettes, almost as a way of showing that Groggs is still actually there and we just can't see him. Or maybe it's a metaphor to show that the group members just can't move on or forget him, I think this is explained beautifully by the wonderful Professor Sky, shout out to his YouTube channel, he's fantastic, where he compares By the Time I Get to Phoenix to Mozart's Requiem, with Requiem being the last piece of music that Mozart released before he died. And now people automatically assume that this is a song about death. And now that song gets notoriously used in all the major death scenes in your favorite movies. So that's one way of looking at the album. But what if we looked at it from a different perspective? A perspective I'm going to call fill in the blanks. As I mentioned earlier, this album feels like it's really unfocused. Like at times it feels like it's screaming at you and trying to tell you so much, but at the same time saying nothing at all. The best way I can describe it is just like you're in someone's mind and you can access all their thoughts, and all of their thoughts are being said all at once. Look man, this isn't easy to explain. It's actually easier if you, the viewer, listen to the album yourself. Because I think the project is intentionally vague. Because by doing that, it lets the listener's mind fill in the blanks in the story, and therefore it creates a tighter emotional connection between the listener and the song or the album itself. And those gaps will be filled by moments in your life. There will be songs where you'll be able to associate a specific key moment that happened in the last year. And every time you listen to that song, whether it's now or in 10 years time, you will always be able to associate that song to that one specific moment. And that's the beauty of this album. I wanted to talk about this album because it's not every day you find an album that genuinely requires a re-listen to actually enjoy it. Now obviously this wasn't the case for everyone. I'm sure some people already knew this was the shit on their first listen. But it does seem like for a lot of people, it didn't quite click at first. And by it being like this, it also gives the album tons of replay value. Because not only is the philosophy of this album really interesting, sonically, this sounds like nothing else that's out there right now. And the fact that I was able to come back to this album 1 year after I first listened to it and find a new level of appreciation for it, it's pretty neat. I know for a fact that there's definitely other albums that do the same thing that this album does. I just thought that in the specific case of this album and the Requiem analogy, it was pretty interesting. This album definitely doesn't appeal to everybody, but to its target audience, this is really a fantastic piece of work, and I truly encourage everybody to go check it out. I'll give it a second chance if you haven't already. Hello. It's been a while. I am absolutely miserable. I've been making this video since February, and I can't lie, I kind of lost interest in making it 2 weeks after I started, but I was already so deep in that I just kind of had to continue, and here we are. And I'm just glad that this video is finished and that I can finally upload something. I don't know what's next, I don't know how long it's gonna take me, but all I do know is that you should subscribe to the second channel, because I've actually been uploading on there. And also, go follow me on Twitch, because I might stream. Maybe. I don't know. I'm gonna stop making promises.